All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the final spotlight session of day two, Finding Where You Fit, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. We are excited to learn more about the evidence-based practices that we can implement in our courses and systematic ways to contribute back to the body of literature through our own investigations of teaching and students' learning. Dr. Packard, the UAGC Senior Vice President of Online Initiatives, is joining us to introduce Dr. Scherf. Gary, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Lauren. So, yeah, I was going through, thinking back to 2008 and what was I doing in 2008? And lots of things were going on at the Air Force Academy when I was there. We were working on the Center for Character and Leadership Development in its initial form. We were doing an overhaul of curriculum and focusing on respect for human dignity issues. We were focusing on how do we actually work with the American Associations of Colleges and Universities better on their core commitment consortium, on learning outcomes, and so on. And I had the wisdom to hire Lauren Scherf and have her join our team at the Behavioral Sciences Department, where I was the department head at the time. That's where I first met Lauren. And I don't think either of us would have thought that 16 years later, we'd be sitting on a Zoom meeting because, well, there was no Zoom thing back then, talking about work that she had not yet started yet at the Air Force Academy and that she was still there. We brought her in as a visiting professor, and we were very fortunate that she stayed with us. So a little bit about Lauren's background. She's a professor of behavioral sciences at the Air Force Academy and the director of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning program at the Air Force Academy. Prior to her coming to the Academy, she was a professor of psychology at Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas, and the inaugural co-director of their Teaching Excellence Center. Her work with the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, or SOTL, at the Air Force Academy has been nothing but groundbreaking. She has done amazing work with the faculty at a primarily teaching-oriented undergraduate liberal education university to help them focus on how do we better document and improve how we teach and help students learn as part of their journey as cadets and future officers in the Air Force. She has a strong background in metacognitive instruction and the kinds of things that we are interested in when it becomes important for us to do teaching and learning oriented kinds of ideas. She is past president of the Southwestern Psychological Association and has served as the United States Regional Vice President for IS-SOTL. I don't know what the IS stands for, Laura, and you'll have to explain that to us. She's several important awards to include the Florence L. Denmark Psychi National Faculty Advisor Award in 2007 and the Gary Poole Distinguished Reviewer Award for IS-SOTL's Journal Teaching and Learning Inquiry in 2021. And she is also the co-creator of an award-winning Improve with Metacognition websites. Lauren, I'm so glad that you are here to join us. We are looking so much forward to what you have to teach us about the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. So welcome.
Thank you. And it's great to see you. It's amazing how time flies. And welcome to everybody who's joining us today. I'm just going to tell you, I'm used to face-to-face. I have done plenty of Zoom through COVID, but if I'm a little rusty at navigating, please bear with me with that. So I'm going to share my screen here and get us started. And I have things minimized here, so it is not, of course, it's starting out rough. There we go. This is what we want. And hopefully you can all see a slide going here.
Yes, looks great.
Excellent. So I love starting with this slide. I study visual perception. And I've always liked illusions and images like this. They are soothing and everything. And I saw this and it reminded me of, like it says, a well-planned course in our minds. We design our courses. Everything's going to be aligned. They're going to flow smoothly, from one activity into the next. And it's going to be beautiful. Of course, our beautiful plans then meet reality. And sometimes things don't work out quite like we planned. The bottom line is that teaching and learning are complex. Our teaching realities change, our institutional contexts change, our students change, we change, the material that we're teaching gets updated. And so we're in a very dynamic context. For example, resources used to be primarily print, and now almost everything is virtual and available online. Of course, AI is recently impacting pretty much everything across the board in teaching and learning. So as instructors and teachers, and in some cases course designers, we have to adapt. And I'm assuming that many of you, especially if you're attending this conference today, you're forward-leaning, so you try new things to increase the impact that you have with your students, and positive impact. And so that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today with SOTL. And I do think that SOTL can help us maximize our impact. Probably most of you want to learn new things about teaching and learning, how you can do it better. You want to better understand how what you're doing impacts your students, and potentially you also want to help other instructors and colleagues, both at your institution and maybe beyond, better understand teaching and learning also. And again, I think that we can do this through SOTL. When we try new things, referring to the existing body of research, the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning research, we can prevent ourselves from having to just like try things ourselves. We can go out there and we can say, what have other people found? So we're not starting from scratch and having to completely reinvent the wheel all the time. If we're trying something new and we are also seeing how it works for us, we might then also consider producing the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, or SOTL work. Actually, both are correct. Depending upon where you are across the country, you might have heard it pronounced both ways, SOTL or SOTL, sort of like tomato. Anyway, it's both there. I actually, kind of going back to the Air Force Academy stuff, as Gary introduced, that's where I am. And the military Air Force Academy are really into acronyms. And so when I first started the SOTL program at the United States Air Force Academy, I think a lot of people there thought that the acronym SOTL was this like thing that was Air Force. And I had to explain to them that this was actually a global thing, that SOTL is a discipline of teaching and learning that happens around the world. So anyway, kind of laugh at that. But as we move forward, you might be thinking, as you hear about this, well, that sounds great about producing SOTL or whatever, but how do you fit with what you do with your context? And again, so that's what we are going to be talking about today. Specifically, we're going to start out with and discuss a little bit about what exactly is SOTL and what it's not. I'm going to share several frameworks for SOTL because I'm hoping that that'll help you find places where you feel like you can plug in. And then I'm going to share some resources and talk about some logistics that might help you feel ready to step into that space also. And as you are here with me today and we're talking through these things, I'm hoping in the back of your mind that you are considering how you might connect and fit. All right, so we are now going to do an activity. So I am going to stop sharing, and Haley is going to share an activity. This is, yes. So there's a QR code for you here, and if you would please join that activity, and we're going to go through 4 questions. And this is the first time I've used this software. Haley's introducing it to me. So again, please bear with me as we go through.
And I see people are joining now. We've got 10 in so far.
Excellent.
Give everyone a few more seconds, and then we will get started. Thank you all for joining in on our activity.
Mhm.
Okay. Look at that. Okay. Shall we go ahead and get started?
Sure.
That was fast. We can always go back if we need to go back.
All right. So how? Okay. All right. So we had 6 people. Am I interpreting that right? 6 people took a go at that one?
Yes.
Okay. And whoever, the one person who said false, that is correct. Now, the rest of you might be saying, what? And I use this question because there's a lot of confusion sometimes about, what is SOTL exactly? And education research is actually a decades-old discipline, well-defined field, and it really focuses more on K through 12 education, understanding the systems and administration of education. And now, when I actually talk about SOTL research and I'm talking to a layperson, I do tell them I'm like, it's an educational research program. But if we want to get really picky, so if you're out there and you're talking to people and somebody says, oh, that's not education research, I just kind of want you to be aware. In SOTL, if you go to the conferences, and ISOTL, by the way, is the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. But if you go to these conferences, you will learn and hear that people describe SOTL differently or in varying ways, and that often we take what's called a big tent, which means we try to be really inclusive. So if you say it's education research, no one's really going to get on you. But if you're talking to somebody who does education research, they might say, oh, what you're doing is different. Because SOTL, if we want to give it a generalized sort of definition, is a systematic inquiry into teaching and learning. That is occurring in higher education. So we are really, the field of SOTL really focuses on higher ed, and it is some sort of systematic inquiry into teaching and learning. So that was number 1. And some other terms that you might have heard and you might wonder about is DBER, which is discipline-based education research. Again, at least at the Air Force Academy, I take a really big tent, and I see some of that on a continuum. Some individuals really say, I'm doing discipline-based education research, and that is not SOTL. Okay, that's fine. But again, a lot of us say, if you're doing a systematic inquiry into teaching and learning and higher ed, we can all talk. We can all learn from each other. But that is another term where you might have heard people talking about higher ed teaching and learning research. Okay, next question.
I feel like that was even faster, and I'm happy to. Oh, the question is still at the top. Okay, good.
Yay! Okay. Once again, it is this is false. And the reason I brought this up is because a lot of times people, when they hear about SOTL, they think that it's really focused just on individual classes. And yes, that's true. Our SOTL can focus very narrowly on our own class, but we are dealing with human beings. Students are humans, we're humans. If we learn about how we learn, how effective our teaching is, even if our context is different from another context, it is still possible to bring things over, and we can learn from each other. And then we might just tweak things for our own context. So next question. Okay. So once again, the answer is false. And once again, this addresses sort of a myth or a misconception about SOTL. We do involve human participants most of the time. Sometimes you might be doing more of a reflective piece and looking at the literature or something like that. But even if you're doing human participants, you don't have to take a social sciences approach, which is typically seen as I have maybe one section of a course and I'm going to try an intervention, and then I'm going to have another section where I won't, and I'm going to do group comparisons. That is a common and certainly a legitimate approach. A lot of social sciences methodologies are used in SOTL, but there's a lot of other methodologies. And so if social science isn't your jam, there's a lot of other ways you can approach a systematic inquiry into teaching and learning. For example, one of my faculty members in history took an autoethnography approach. So you can do both qualitative and quantitative work. And so hopefully that will get you thinking about your fit too. So final question. All right. So it's false. Yes. Another misconception, and I think this is true across the fields, at least several fields where researchers are realizing that it is of value to share failed studies sometimes because it was a good idea and you learned from it. Just because you didn't support your hypothesis shouldn't mean that it's not of value. In fact, Teaching and Learning Inquiry, which is the journal for the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, about 2 years ago now, started a whole new category on like failed studies, just because they realized that they had value. So hopefully these questions got you thinking. And again, I'm used to doing this more in person, but got your juices flowing, got your interest peaked. So let's go back to our talk. And thank you, Haley, for doing the assist on the activity there. And looks like y'all can see my slides again. So we're going to move forward. This overview, I like to walk through it, and Gail Matthews Denitel did such a nice job of putting it together. Instead of using one I had kludged together, I now credit her with this one and use hers. This continuum helps, I think, people think about where does, you might have heard of evidence-based teaching or scholarly teaching and things like that. Where do these all fall relative to each other? Now on the far left, that's not shown because hopefully none of us are there, is like what I would consider bad teaching. And it happens. There are individuals sometimes who really just kind of go in and do their own thing. They don't think about alignment with objectives. They are not too concerned if their students aren't meeting those objectives, but we don't want to talk about them. Hopefully everybody at minimum is intentional. You're really trying to align things and do a good job. If we kind of move along, then we move to evidence-based teaching. And what we do here is we consult the literature. We say, you know, I want to do a good job, and I'm not going to just work based on intuition. I'm going to see what has worked for other people and in what contexts, and then I'm going to try to bring them in. And that can also save you time and effort in trying new things sometimes, and to have a greater likelihood of success. Then we move up to scholarly teaching, and this is really similar to evidence-based teaching, but you're taking more of that inquiry look, and it's often what even accrediting agencies want us to do and our institutional leadership wants us to do. They're like, great, you tried something, did it work? Right? So as we try new things based on the evidence, we then try to gather some sort of evidence to see if it worked. It can be informal or maybe more formal assessment work, but we are then having that sort of inquiring mind. And then if we would like to, we can move to the scholarship of teaching and learning. And the big difference there is that now instead of just collecting sort of assessment data to see whether or not what we're trying is working well for our students and our context, we are doing it a little more systematically with the intent to then disseminate and build on the body of literature that's out there. And so hopefully that helps you kind of have an understanding of, maybe where do you stand right now? And if you're already doing some assessment work and having that scholarly teaching lens, it's really not a big, huge jump into the scholarship of teaching and learning. So some main characteristics of SOTL is that it's systematic and that there are multiple methodologies, again, not just social sciences, but a whole range, and we will go through some of those. And that it's focused on teaching and learning in higher education. So now hopefully you feel like you have a good sense of what SOTL or SOTL is. And I saw it in the chat that somebody said roof or rough. So another good example of pronunciation. All right. So I'd like you to do right now is think of a question or two that you currently have about your teaching or your students' learning. And this might be centered on a challenge that you're having or something new that you've tried or something that you've learned or anything really. And do me a favor and just jot it down because we're going to come back to it later. But just for a minute, I'm going to give you a minute here to think about your class or maybe a class you'll be teaching. And what is some sort of question you have? Okay. All right. We're going to take a turn now at our second sort of objective for the talk and go through some useful frameworks. And what I'm hoping these will do again is help you figure out sort of how you might fit in. And the first one that we're going to talk about is a taxonomy of inquiry questions. And these were proposed by Pat Hutchins and some of her colleagues back in 2000. And Pat Hutchins is one of sort of the founding fathers, if you will, of SOTL and highly respected. I've worked with her and she's amazing. And I'm going to let her explain these in her own words. So I'm going to stop sharing again. And Haley, my amazing assistant here, is going to screen share the video of Pat discussing these. And I'm not hearing anything right now.
Let's try that again.
I should begin by saying that this came out of the work of the Carnegie Academy for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And though people often attribute it to me, it really was a product of the collective work of the program, and Lee Schulman, certainly, Mary Huber, all of us working together. And it has been more suggestive to people than I could ever have imagined. So here's how it goes. It could have more pieces than this, but in its simplest version. A first kind of question is an is it working question. And this is where I think a lot of faculty begin. They're trying something new in their teaching and they want to know, is it working? Is it achieving the goal, the goals, the learning that they're aiming for? They're using problem-based learning for the first time and they want to know whether it's meeting their goals for student learning. So it's an is it working question. But another kind of question is a what does it look like question. We had folks in the Castle program who started out with a "is it working" question and then realized that they didn't even really know what they were looking for. And so they began instead with a kind of descriptive question, just looking at what went on, say, in a seminar. How do you even describe the dynamics of a seminar and the kind of intellectual community that characterizes a seminar and makes it a seminar rather than something else? So they developed a kind of descriptive framework for thinking about a seminar. And then they could ask an "is it working" question. The descriptive question was really a prior one. A related third kind of question is a sort of what would it look like question. That is to say, what would it look like if I were to teach this course in a completely different way that I at least have never taught it and that would be really sort of new for the field. One of the folks in the Castle program was teaching abnormal psychology, and she got onto the notion, this was at least 10 years ago, that rather than teaching it as a course in all the kinds of psychological problems people could have, it would be more useful for her students to teach it as a course about resilience, sort of the positive psychology spin, which was newer then than it is now. That was a wholly different way to teach that course at the time. And I mean, there were many more interesting details there, but it was a real shift in the vision of what such a course could look like. And finally, I'll stop at 4. The fourth kind of question was really sort of a theory or concept building kind of question, where the notion was to build a different way of making meaning out of the things that teachers and students do together in the classroom. And an example there was the work of a faculty member in English who was looking at how students and faculty think about moments of difficulty in the classroom. She wasn't asking, does it work? She wasn't asking, what does it look like? She was really theorizing about difficulty and helping all of us who have moments of difficulty in the classroom think about how to make sense of that.
Thank you, Haley. Appreciate that. Let's go back here. So again, lots of different ways you can sort of enter and fit into Subtle in this way. And most common when I work with my faculty at the Air Force Academy, number 1 and 2 are the most common, but I certainly have a few people that take an approach that would better fit 3 or 4 too. All right, a second framework, and this is a new one, is the Grand Challenges for Subtle. And these were just really released a year ago. They're based on this idea, like we're talking about, teaching is very complex, that there are wicked problems of teaching and learning. And if you have a wicked problem, then that leads to a grand challenge in trying to address it. And basically the idea of a wicked problem is that it is a problem for which there's no simple solution. The context is dynamic, the characteristics of the people and the resources and the constraints are all also dynamic. And so really and truly, there's never going to be a single forever solution. And so you might say, well, then why do you bother? But similar to what I was talking about before, in that your individual classroom research can actually bring insights to other people's contexts and classrooms. The idea is with wicked problems and grand challenges that you can study them and work on them from more that narrow perspective, but then by sharing and collaborating across contexts, you can get a better idea of the challenge at large in order to address it more globally. So a group of us, starting back in 2018, started a grand adventure of identifying the grand challenges for Subtle. Engineering identified theirs back in 2008, and it really led to a lot of really amazing initiatives. So that sort of sparked my interest when I went to an ASEE conference in 2011, and that's American Society of Engineering Education. Since then, social work has grand challenges identified, assessment has identified grand challenges, a lot of other disciplines have. And so we were thinking that it would be useful for SOTL to also identify them in order to build collaborations and help people, feel like they were part of something beyond just their own individual classroom research. So what we did in order to determine these is we had multiple global surveys. Then we did thematic analyses of all of the responses that we got. Then we engaged with 12 experts across the globe, all of the continents, representing 12 different countries, and had them give feedback and winnow it down. And then we finalized them and presented them to the SOTL community at the iCITL conference last year in 2023. This shows very, very simply what the 5 grand challenges are. So developing critical and creative thinkers, encouraging students to be engaged in learning, understanding the complex processes of learning, understanding how identities affect both teaching and learning, and the practice, use, and growth of SOTL. And you might see these and say, yeah, our institution has had this outcome forever, critical thinking. And it's not that they haven't been recognized before, but what we're trying to do here is recognize that these are wicked challenges, that they are going to take some pretty incredible changes in the way we do things and approach them in order to really make serious progress. And as the higher ed student body, the student population has become more diverse, as our contexts have really become more diverse, it's really important that we understand and better, more deeply understand these different areas. So if you go to the iCITL, if you type in grand challenges of SOTL, you should come to the website. We have it. The iCITL has been gracious to host all of this on their site, but this is not the grand challenges for iCITL. These are the grand challenges for SOTL. So whether or not you're a member of iCITL, the International Society, it doesn't matter. These are across the board. And when you come to the landing page, you'll see the grand challenges here, and there's links for each of the grand challenges. If you want more on the history here, some of the directions that we're taking going forward. And this gives an overview. Each page, when you go to each grand challenge, is organized in the following way. It talks about what is it, and it defines it with more nuance. So when we got all of those responses from around the world, we had thousands of responses. Those little snippets don't capture all the nuances. And so you'll be able to see that, metacognition is in there. Teaching with technology is in there. So they are brought in meaningful ways. But when we had to give the grand challenges labels, of course, we had to be short and concise. We also describe why and how this grand challenge is important. And it goes beyond just identifying it. And then what's needed to address this. And again, we actually call for some pretty bold changes in the way we do things. And then I also want to point you out to, at the bottom of each grand challenge, we say, how might SOTL practitioners study this? And then we have example questions. So you all just wrote some questions about things that you were interested in about your own teaching and student learning. And we have example questions for each of the grand challenges. So I'm going to just give you a taste of some of these. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each, but you can start to see some of the nuances. Again, there's more on the web pages. I do want to say critical and creative thinking. Some of what is challenging about this is they've often been seen as separate, that, STEM disciplines do critical thinking and maybe the humanities and arts do creative thinking. But really and truly, if we're going to be solving these wicked problems that exist in the world, we need to not only be able to recognize and use Information, we have to be able to synthesize it in new ways. We're going to need to bring these together and not treat them as separate. And so what works and what's possible, here are 2 example questions that gives you maybe some ideas. And I was thinking some of these might pertain to some of you. How do the approaches to teaching critical and creative thinking work differently for different students in different contexts? Okay. Y'all have a range of students and contexts with your institution. What's possible? How might we scaffold the learning of critical and creative thinking across multiple years of higher education? More and more institutions are really trying to link courses and not just treat every course individually. How can we build these skills? Because skills like this are not going to be fully developed in a single course. And so we really need to think about how are we going to scaffold these across courses and experiences. Encouraging students to be engaged in learning. Here we see engaged learners are metacognitive. A lot of the things that we saw in the responses talked about both students and the population at large valuing higher education. I think a lot of people have the model that learning is just about memorizing information. Those of us who are actually educators realize it's more than that, at least most of us do. And that requires work and effort. Learning is hard work. You got to change your brain. And so staying motivated to engage in that effortful process is something that is really important for all of us, for all of our learners. And then again, there's 3 different example questions that could be subtle questions that people could investigate. Understanding the complex processes of learning. For a long time, learning was really treated as a cognitive-only process. And we know that it's not. Our emotions affect our learning, our social situations and cultural ways of doing things affect our learning. And we have learners in our class that come from very different places and have very different background experiences, which is going to affect their learning. Couple of questions again there that, a what works example and a what's possible example. One of the other things that's hard about learning is that it's internal. So there might be stuff in there in our students' heads, and we have to figure out what is the best way to assess that and make sure that we are actually accurately giving them credit, if you will, for what they've learned. How identities affect both teaching and learning. And this looks at both instructors and students and how we interact. And those dynamics get really complex. And people bring a lot of maybe preconceived ideas about others into their interactions. And all of that, again, is going to impact learning. So again, here are a couple example SOTL questions. And I think the what works, how can learners and educators grow their awareness of their own identity and mitigate the possible negative impacts from identity-based assumptions? I mean, that's big. That's a big question, but we can each look at that maybe in our own spaces and then contribute so that we can build broader understanding. The practice, use, and growth of SOTL, this is a little bit different compared to some of the other disciplines who have identify their grand challenges. Typically, they only look sort of what I would consider those outward facing, like we would be looking at teaching and learning. This final grand challenge for SOTL really is more inward looking, because it's looking at how do instructors actually use the SOTL research that's out there. How do we engage in this? A lot of institutions are not structured to value and recognize SOTL work. Traditionally, disciplinary research is the coin of the realm. And around the globe, instructors who engage in SOTL report the struggles that they have because it may not be valued. There's differences between sort of tenure track faculty or adjunct faculty and whether or not they are encouraged to engage in SOTL and what's expected. So that's where this particular grand challenge comes from. my understanding from talking to Gary is that he's trying to build some structures to help support and encourage SOTL in your institution. All right, and so a third framework, jump gears a little bit, is the 4M framework, and pretty fancy name. It comes from the fact that the 4Ms, there are 4 words that start with M. And this was adopted. It's actually multiple disciplines sort of use this framework in their own way, but it's been really useful in SOTL to help people doing SOTL kind of figure out the scope and where they're fitting in. And where I think most people are familiar with SOTL is at the micro level. So an individual instructor, or maybe a small number of instructors who are teaching the same course at the same time, decide to do a SOTL project together. And so that would be considered micro, and it really focuses at the classroom level. Meso is when you start looking a little broader, maybe at a sequence of courses in a program, in a department, and the teaching and learning inquiry questions there are obviously linked to what happens in the classroom, but also look broader than that. Macro is looking at the institutional level. So maybe you're looking at how courses across disciplines support specific institutional outcomes, might be an example there. And then mega is cross-institutional or disciplinary across institutions. And so I've done some work where I've collaborated with instructors across institutions, and then that allows us to look at these questions from the perspective of different contexts, maybe different types of student populations, and try to find patterns and commonalities across these different situations. And then relatively recently, Nancy Chick really was the spark for this movement of going public and realizing that we shouldn't always just focus on people in higher ed, that when we learn about teaching and learning, this affects people beyond higher ed. And so policymakers for educational policies, parents of our students, other citizens and other roles related to teaching and learning could all potentially have interest in and benefit from learning about SOTL research. And so that breaks the 4M, but so it's 4M plus. All right. So we have now gone through the frameworks, and what I would like you to do now is take a few minutes to go back to those questions you jotted down. And if you would, think about ways it might fit any of those frameworks I just presented. The inquiry questions, what type of question was it that you were asking? Is it a what is question? Is it a what works question? Is it a what's possible question? Does it link to one of the grand challenges? And were you looking at it in a sort of micro way in your own classroom or course? Or were you thinking about maybe how your course fit into a sequence of other courses? If you're more of an administrator, were you thinking on a higher level? So take a couple minutes and see if you can connect with those frameworks. And in a minute, I would love to hear, or maybe, I guess, in the chat, because in webinar, I'm learning this about Zoom. In webinar format, you can't, y'all can't talk to me. So I'm trying to get, so I can see my chat again. I'm struggling.
And I can also monitor the chat and sort
That
of.
would be great, because right now, what on my screen, I'm just not even seeing the, I think I found it. It's been a while since I've had to navigate like this to do a talk. I can see videos now. Anyway, yes, Haley, I would appreciate that. So if any of you would be willing to share, I would love to hear any examples that you have about how maybe your question connected with any of those grand challenges, or not grand challenges, any of those frameworks.
Yeah. All right. So I saw a question pop up from Dr. Holmes. He's the chair of our IRB. And he has offered, has research shown a preferred online classroom design or layout to maximize student learning? I know LMSs, learning management systems, sometimes determine how things appear, but course organization can vary. That's the question he's working on.
That is a really cool question. So how would you say that connects to any of those frameworks?
And I can unmute Dr. Holmes if you would prefer to come off of, if you're in a place where you can come off of your mic, or come off of mute. I know sometimes folks have. Okay. All right. I think that worked.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So as far as frameworks, one of your earlier ones, I mean, you posed the question of reaching diverse learners and the idea of scaffolding across curriculums. I don't know that it tied into one of the direct measures, but that got me thinking about just the best ways that we can reach students. And I have to think that given your interest in visual design, that there has to be a way or some research that's been conducted to show what is a preferred layout, what is a preferred design that just generates a sense of comfort and ideally belonging, that they feel comfortable moving on, and that's not going to be an intimidating space for them.
Mm-hmm. And I would say there's probably something out there in the literature that is not, I can't tell you off the bat, but if I'm connecting it to the frameworks, I would say that might be a what's work type of question. And when you're talking about comfort and sense of belonging, a lot of that brings in the identities grand challenges. And then if you're looking at it for a learning management system, that's going to be across an institution at that level. And so I would say there's probably something out there, but I cannot at the moment directly answer your question, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes complete sense. No, I was just, it was something that popped in my head when we were going through your slides and I was hearing you speak. It was the neat visuals that you're putting up, just thinking that every level or every touch point has an opportunity. And I'm thinking that maybe the classroom has an opportunity as well.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree. All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holmes. Let's see, other questions in the chat. Looking to see if there's a framework for feedback that can be implemented across an online institution. Kate Johnson says, I see the connection to the 4M framework at the macro level, but also grand challenges question number 5.
Yeah, no, I love that. So no, I think that's a great example. So I'm just looking for examples here. No, hopefully this is getting y'all like feeling like, oh, this is interesting. I want to do more with this. So thank you for sharing that too. And I did finally get my chat open, so.
Okay, good. I do see a comment from Sola, and we could probably work together to put that into a research question.
Yes.
The impact of personality and experience effect on learners.
And it looks like she said micro. Yeah, and I really want to emphasize that even though sometimes people think bigger is better or whatever, micro, and this goes back to that second question that we talked about, remember in the activity, is micro studies are just as valuable as the bigger studies because they help build the body of knowledge and they bring all these different contexts in, which is like bringing in multiple perspectives to a complex problem. And the micro context is usually where we are the most familiar, we have the most control, and so it's a really accessible place for us to operate when we are thinking about teaching and learning and trying to understand the impact of what we're doing. So, okay. So I'm going to go ahead because I'm keeping an eye on time here, is that I'm going to move along. And I wanted to talk a little bit about logistics, because you might say, great, I know how to ask questions, but I don't know how to do so. And I want to emphasize that there's multiple sources of data and types of methodologies. And there are some handouts that Haley is going to be sharing. And I think we're going to actually let her put those up. So I'm going to stop sharing again. And Haley, it doesn't matter which of the two that you show first of those charts. These handouts are going to be, I think she's going to drop them into the chat so that you can open them up and look at them also. I'm making her work hard now. I do want to say that these two charts, a very good colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Jen Freeberg at Illinois State University, she put these together. She and I have very similar sort of roles. And she was using them like, oh my gosh, those are awesome, because I talk through this stuff all the time. And here she did put in this beautiful chart. So I share these and give her full credits on the handout too. And so are you
Uploaded three files into the chat.
perfect? So the two charts that we're going to be talking about, and then also an overview of those frameworks that we talked about. And so can you open up one of those PDFs and just throw it up there for me? Thank you so much. Is it opening for you, Haley? Ah, beautiful. This is too small for you to read, which is why I wanted you to, that's better, thank you. Also have a copy of these. So if you look here, you can see study designs, and Pat Hutchins also referred to this, descriptive research, and often that is a what is question maybe. I'm a big proponent of both like mixed methods, so you can do some descriptive work. One type of lens to understand what's happening in a classroom is our own. So maybe we are going to gather quantitative data about our students' performance, or we might ask them about their level of motivation. We might ask them directly, you know, what worked or didn't work for you. But we also have our own observations. And again, teaching and learning, we're part of the picture. And so you might do either descriptive of what's happening in your classroom, but from your own perspective, as well as gathering, you can have observational, other people can come in and observe you, and things like that. And if you would scroll down, then you'll see the correlational research. So again, if you do some surveys or you want to figure out, does certain student characteristics, do they tend to correlate with performance differently in different situations if you try different activities? So you start to bring in correlational work. And then the final type of data is the actual quantitative data, where you're dealing with numbers. And numbers, again, can come from different sources. Sometimes it can be performance. I do always like to try to emphasize that performance data alone is not always the most useful way to go. So imagine that, I'm just going to take a really simple social sciences approach. I have a section of a course that I'm teaching with a new intervention, and then one that I'm considering my control. All of my students in both classes are presumably going to be motivated to succeed. If I only look at grades, I might find that there's actually not a difference if I do like a statistical analysis and compare the grades. And then I'm going to say, oh, well, that was, you know, a lot of time and energy wasted on this intervention because it didn't really change my students' grades all that much. And that was my measure of impact. The problem is that maybe your intervention really was successful and it made it a lot easier for your students to learn. Maybe it motivated them more. There's all these other things that it could have done. Meanwhile, in your control class, those students are working their butts off to get the grades so that their grades match this other section. And if you're only looking at grades, you're going to miss that. And so when I work with my faculty, I typically encourage them, performance is important. That's how we assess their learning, whether it's on an exam or a writing assignment or whatever it is that we're doing. That is a really legitimate way to look for impact, but it's not going to tell us the why. And sometimes it might mask things that are happening that aren't revealed just by looking at the performance. So hopefully that makes sense. And so the sound is not clear, please. Okay, am I cutting in and out?
No, I can hear you, but sometimes individuals' internet at their home may impact that sound too.
Okay, good. We're having snow here, so you never know what it does to the networks. Okay, can you jump to the other spreadsheet then on the different types of data? Oh, you had it there. It was just a different tab. All right. So here, just to give you ideas, is that there's a lot of different types of data. I've been talking about performance data. You can do surveys of students. You might interview some students or do focus groups. Think alouds, if you're not familiar with that. I have a human factors background, so that's a common tool, but you can actually have students talk out loud as they go through an activity or an exercise, and they can see it reveals their thinking versus if you were just observing them, you may not capture everything. And then if you can scroll down for me. Thank you so much. We have pre-post tests, so we can see if there's a difference. So sometimes you may not have a control group, but you can do a sort of pre-assessment at the beginning of the semester and post at the end. Often I recommend if you're trying to capture, if you're trying something really new and the students, it's going to be new and different. Sometimes what happens is that you don't have a linear change between the pre and the post. And you might want to know how quickly did it take them to sort of become comfortable with this new approach. And so what you might want to do, and I would make them very short so that you don't have survey fatigue, but at the start of the semester, you introduce this new approach and you get feedback from them. Okay, how anxious are you? Does this make sense to you? Things like that. And then maybe a week or two in, like they're just getting into it, you try to capture that again. And then again, a few weeks later and again. And so you can do it maybe 4 times across a semester or something like that. Because what you might find is that the learning curve is steep and then, oops, now they're comfortable. Or it might take them a lot longer to get comfortable. And then finally at the end they are. And as an instructor, it's really useful for you to know their level of comfort with this new approach. And you don't want to be assuming that the comfort grew quickly if it's not, or vice versa. And so if you only do pre-post, then you're missing that. You don't know how long it took them to get comfortable, if that makes sense. So then next on the back of that, and again, you have these sheets. There are some other types of data also. Yep. And so here we get to participant observations, your course assignments, you're doing that anyway. Those are a source of data. And then student reflections. And we know from the SOTL research that student reflections help students learn more deeply, but they can also be a really rich source of qualitative data when you're trying to understand student learning. So, and again, they could be written or verbal, video now, whatever, there's a lot of different ways. So, okay, I'm going to have you unshare if you would. And I have like 1 slide left, and then I know we're at 4 o'clock, and I apologize for keeping people on longer. So thank you for your patience. So let me share. Okay. So we talked about the sources of data, methodologies, potential dissemination arenas. These are both run by Kennesaw State, but they have searchable teaching and learning journal lists and conference lists. So if you're like, I don't even know where to start, go here. And we'll be sharing these slides. You can have these links, but they're searchable. So you can look by discipline, you can look by location, et cetera, if you're looking for conferences and things. So it's great. Making it manageable. These are my like top 3 recommendations. Pick a focus you're passionate about. Just like learning requires effort, systematic inquiry into learning will require some effort. And so pick something you're passionate about. Take advantage of already existing potential data sources. Then you've got them. If you're already doing some assessment or whatever, you already have data sources. And I do recommend finding collaborators. Collaborators can make it more fun. They bring extra perspectives. They can help with the load when you're trying to develop a proposal. They can help you interpret the data. So collaborations are great. And that brings us to the end. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope that this sparked some interest for all of you and provided some resources so you feel like you at least have a place to start.
Yes, absolutely. Very informative and encouraging presentation, Dr. Scharf. So thank you for joining us. With that, everyone, we will close down day 2 of the 10th annual UAGC Teaching and Learning Conference. We hope to see you tomorrow for, speaking of research, for our postgraduate student research presentations that we'll be highlighting in the morning. And we will close the 10th annual TLC conference tomorrow with the awards ceremony. So hope to see you all there. Thank you again, Dr. Scharf.
Thanks for having me. Y'all have a good evening.